If you garden in Florida, you already know that the rules are different here. The plants that thrive in catalogs and gardening books written for the rest of America often die quietly in our backyards by July. The hostas that look beautiful in pictures from the Carolinas turn to mush in our humidity within 6 weeks of planting. The lavender that smells wonderful in California gardens rots from the roots in our sandy summer soil. And the peonies that bloom for 40 years in Pennsylvania never get the winter chill they need to even survive their first season here. Florida gardening is its own world, and the plants that succeed here are a specific group of survivors that were either bred for our conditions or have lived through our conditions for generations. 11 perennials exist that genuinely thrive in Florida heat and humidity, year after year, with almost no labor once established, and that look beautiful from a porch chair in August when it is too hot to actually be out in the garden. Some of them you have probably seen in older Florida neighborhoods without knowing what they were. A few of them you may have planted before and watched die, simply because nobody told you the specific Florida planting trick that makes them succeed. And 2 of them are so specific to this state, so deeply tied to Florida's history and ecology, that almost no gardener outside Florida has ever heard of them. One of them is a heritage bulb, planted by great-grandmothers 100 years ago, whose original plantings are still blooming today in abandoned Florida homesteads. The other is an ancient native plant that has been growing in this state since long before there was a Florida, and it is the only host plant for one of the rarest butterflies in North America. I am going to walk you through all 11, exactly how to plant each one in Florida specifically, exactly how to handle them through hurricane season, and exactly what each one costs to grow in your yard versus what comparable plants would cost you in landscaping installation if you hired someone to do it. Some of these plants will save you hundreds of dollars per year on your water bill alone because they require almost no irrigation once established. A few of them will become the kind of permanent landscape features that the next family who lives in your home will still be enjoying. And all 11 of them will give you something the chain garden centers will never tell you about, which is that beautiful low-labor gardening in Florida is genuinely possible, but only if you stop trying to grow the plants that work in the rest of America and start growing the plants that have always belonged here. The order matters. The unfamiliar ones come later. Stay with me through all 11, because the last one alone is worth the entire video if you care about Florida's natural heritage. Before we dive into today's video, I have a major announcement. The gardening guide you've been writing to me about for months is finally here. The Plant Once Garden is officially out. You have been incredibly patient with me while I took the time to get this right. It is approximately 150 pages of everything this channel teaches, gathered into one complete reference, designed with a hand-drawn heritage cover and warm cream pages that feel like a guide your grandmother would have owned. Inside, you'll find the 90 perennial plants that come back every year with almost no labor, 6 complete garden plans, the no-labor planting calendar, and the hydrogen peroxide method explained completely. I've also included the specific perennials that bring hummingbirds dancing right outside your window, the chapter on what your garden becomes over 20 years, and the mistakes that kill perennials. This is a reference you can lean on for the rest of your gardening life. You can scan the QR code on your screen right now, or click the link in the pinned comment or description below to get your copy. Thank you again for your patience. Now, back to the garden. Let's start with lantana, the unkillable Florida classic that produces clusters of small bright flowers in yellow, orange, pink, red, purple, or white, from spring all the way through frost, in some parts of the state never going dormant at all. Lantana is the plant most Florida garden centers sell more of than any other perennial, because once you have grown it successfully, you understand why everything else feels like more work than it is worth. What makes lantana so well suited to Florida specifically is that it actively thrives in conditions that kill most other flowering perennials. The brutal afternoon sun that scorches azaleas leaves lantana unbothered. The sandy soil that starves heavy feeders gives lantana exactly what it wants. The summer humidity that brings powdery mildew to phlox does nothing to lantana. And the salt spray near coastal areas that kills most ornamental plants leaves lantana looking fresh and healthy. The plant evolved in tropical climates with conditions much harsher than Florida summers, and our conditions feel mild to it by comparison. Plant lantana in full sun, in any well-drained soil including pure sand, with spacing of 3 to 4 feet between plants, because mature lantana shrubs become substantial. Water deeply once a week for the first month after planting. After that, water only during extended dry periods. Lantana overwatered in Florida soil will rot at the roots and die. Lantana underwatered in Florida soil will continue blooming as if nothing is wrong. When in doubt, water less. Important note for hurricane season. Cut lantana back hard by about 2/3 before a major storm. The flowers and outer foliage will be destroyed by hurricane wind anyway, and the cutback prevents the entire plant from being torn apart at the root. Cost reality. A 1-gallon lantana plant at a Florida garden center runs about $8 to $15. A planting of 5 mature lantana shrubs along a fence or property line will produce continuous bloom for 9 to 10 months of the year, replacing seasonal annual plantings that would cost $200 to $400 per year. Over a typical 5 to 7 year life of a healthy lantana planting, the savings versus annual replanting easily reach $2,000 to $3,000. And the plant looks better the longer it lives. Pentas. Pentas lanceolata, the Egyptian starflower. The plant that produces clusters of small 5-petaled star-shaped flowers in red, pink, white, lavender, or coral, blooming continuously from spring through hard frost, and the single most reliable butterfly-attracting plant in Florida gardening. Pentas is technically grown as an annual in most of America, but functions as a perennial across most of Florida, returning reliably from the same root crown year after year, in zones 9 and warmer. In zones 10 and 11 across South Florida, pentas never goes dormant at all and blooms 12 months of the year. The plants attract butterflies more aggressively than almost any other Florida perennial. Zebra longwings, Gulf fritillaries, monarchs, swallowtails, and dozens of other species visit pentas plantings throughout the day. Hummingbirds also feed heavily on pentas during their fall and spring migrations through the state. Plant pentas in full sun to part shade in well-drained soil amended with a little compost. The plants tolerate sandy Florida soil but produce more abundant blooms with some organic matter mixed into the planting hole. Space plants about 18 to 24 inches apart. Water deeply once a week during the first growing season. After that, water only during dry periods. Pentas requires almost no maintenance once established, with the exception of deadheading spent flower clusters to encourage continuous reblooming. Cut the plants back by about half in late winter to encourage vigorous spring growth. Cost reality. A 4-inch pentas plant at a Florida garden center runs about $3 to $6. A planting of 15 pentas in a butterfly garden bed will produce continuous bloom and butterfly activity for at least 9 to 10 months of every year. Compared to planting annual flowers to attract butterflies, pentas saves roughly $150 to $300 per year in replacement plant costs. The bonus is the butterfly activity itself. Once a pentas garden is established, the butterfly population builds year over year as more females discover the reliable nectar source, and a mature pentas planting becomes a small private butterfly preserve. Plumbago. Plumbago auriculata, the Cape plumbago. The plant that produces clouds of soft sky blue flowers in clusters at the tips of arching stems, blooming nearly continuously through Florida's long warm season. There is no other true blue flowering perennial in Florida gardening that performs as reliably as plumbago, and the cool blue color provides a visual relief from the relentless oranges and yellows and reds that dominate Florida heat-tolerant plants. Plumbago is a sprawling semi-shrub that grows 3 to 6 feet tall and equally wide at maturity. The plant tolerates full sun to part shade, sandy soil, salt spray, and moderate drought. It is hardy to zone 9 across most of Florida and rarely experiences dieback even in North Florida winters. The flowers attract butterflies and small native bees throughout the bloom period. Plumbago is also one of the few Florida perennials that genuinely tolerates the conditions under live oak trees and other large shade trees, where the combination of root competition, dappled shade, and irregular moisture defeats most other ornamental plants. Plant plumbago in spring or early summer in full sun to part shade. Space plants at least 3 feet apart because mature plumbago shrubs spread substantially. Water deeply once a week for the first month after planting. After that, water only during extended dry periods. Plumbago benefits from a hard cutback in late winter. Cut the entire plant back to about 1 foot tall in February to encourage vigorous fresh growth and abundant spring blooming. The plant also handles hurricane season well, because its flexible stems bend rather than break in high winds. Cut back lightly before a major storm if the plant has become particularly large. Cost reality. A 1-gallon plumbago plant at a Florida garden center runs about $8 to $12. A planting of 3 to 5 plumbago shrubs as a foundation planting or along a fence will provide nearly continuous blue bloom for 8 to 10 months of the year, with the plants growing larger and more impressive each year. Over a 15 to 20-year typical lifespan in Florida gardens, the cost per month of bloom is among the lowest of any perennial discussed in this video. Mexican petunia, specifically the well-behaved cultivated varieties, Mayan compact, Mayan purple, Mayan white, and never the wild species form. This distinction matters. The wild form of Mexican petunia is classified as a Category 1 invasive species in Florida and is illegal to plant in most counties. The cultivated Mayan series, developed by University of Florida horticulturists specifically to be sterile and non-spreading, is the only acceptable form to grow in a Florida garden. Mexican petunia produces dramatic trumpet-shaped purple, pink, or white flowers daily from spring through fall, with each individual flower lasting only a single day but with new flowers opening continuously across the plant. The Mayan compact varieties grow about 2 to 3 feet tall and equally wide, forming neat upright clumps that work beautifully in mass plantings, borders, or as accent specimens. The plant tolerates the full range of Florida conditions: full sun, sandy soil, occasional flooding from summer storms, drought, salt spray, and the brutal humidity of August. Plant Mayan series Mexican petunia in full sun in any well-drained soil. Space plants about 18 inches apart for mass plantings or 3 feet apart for specimen use. Water deeply once a week during establishment. After the first growing season, the plants require essentially no supplemental watering except during extended drought. Cut back by about half in late winter to encourage fresh spring growth. The plants benefit from light fertilization once in spring with a balanced, slow-release fertilizer, though they bloom reliably even with no fertilization at all. Cost reality. A 1-gallon Mayan series Mexican petunia at a Florida garden center runs about $10 to $15. A mass planting of 7 to 9 plants in a sunny bed creates a dramatic purple flowering display that lasts 10 months of the year and continues for many years from a single planting. Buy only certified Mayan varieties from reputable Florida nurseries. Never accept Mexican petunia divisions from a neighbor's garden unless you can verify the variety, because the wild form spreads aggressively and will dominate everything around it. Crinum lily, Crinum species. And here is the first genuine surprise of this entire video. The heritage Florida bulb that has been growing in Florida gardens since before the Civil War, and whose original plantings from 100 years ago are still actively blooming today in abandoned old Florida homesteads, where the houses have collapsed and the yards have grown over, but the crinum lilies continue to flower every spring exactly as they have for the last century. Crinum lilies are massive bulbs that produce dramatic strap-shaped foliage, 3 to 4 feet long, and tall flowering stalks, topped with clusters of large, lily-like fragrant flowers in white, pink, deep red, or striped combinations. The plants are nearly indestructible once established. The bulbs themselves can grow to the size of a softball or larger, with extensive deep root systems that draw water and nutrients from soil layers most other plants cannot reach. Mature crinum plantings have been known to survive direct hits from hurricanes, summer droughts that killed surrounding plants, and decades of complete neglect, and to continue blooming reliably every spring throughout all of it. There are several crinum species and dozens of named cultivars suited to Florida gardens. Crinum bulbospermum is the toughest and most reliable, with white and pink striped flowers and tolerance for the widest range of conditions. Crinum americanum is the native Florida species, with pure white fragrant flowers and a preference for wetter soil. Crinum jagus is the smaller growing milk and wine cultivar with white flowers striped in burgundy. The named cultivars like Ellen Bosanquet, deep wine red, and Mrs. James Hendry, light pink, have been passed down through generations of Florida gardeners and are now available again through specialty bulb suppliers. Plant crinum bulbs in full sun to part shade in any soil: sandy, clay, alkaline, acidic, occasionally flooded, or chronically dry. Plant the bulbs deep, with the necks just at or slightly below the soil surface. Water deeply once a week during the first growing season. After that, the plants require essentially no care for the rest of their lives. Crinum plantings do not need to be divided, do not need to be fertilized, and do not need to be replanted. The original bulbs continue to grow and multiply slowly over decades, eventually forming substantial clumps. Cost reality is dramatic. A crinum bulb from a specialty Florida bulb supplier runs about $15 to $30 for a mature blooming size bulb. The same bulb planted in your yard this year will still be blooming in your great-grandchildren's yard 100 years from now. There is no other perennial in Florida gardening that delivers this kind of multi-generational permanence from a single planting. Firebush, Humidity patens, the Florida native shrub perennial that produces tubular orange-red flowers continuously from spring through frost, and the single most powerful hummingbird-attracting plant in Florida gardening. Hummingbirds will travel across entire neighborhoods to find established firebush plantings, and a mature firebush in flower attracts hummingbirds throughout every daylight hour during the migration seasons. Firebush is native to South Florida and the Caribbean, but it grows successfully throughout the state with some winter dieback in zones 9A and 9B. In zones 10 and 11, firebush remains evergreen and continuously blooming all year. The plants grow into substantial shrubs 4 to 8 feet tall and equally wide at maturity, with attractive foliage that turns reddish in fall, and small dark berries that attract native birds throughout winter. Florida native variants of firebush are far superior to the common landscape hybrids sold at many garden centers. Request specifically the native species Humidity patens, not the dwarf or compact hybrid forms. Plant firebush in full sun to part shade in well-drained soil. The plant tolerates sandy Florida soil with no amendment necessary. Space plants 4 to 5 feet apart. Water deeply once a week for the first month, then only during extended dry periods. Firebush is essentially unkillable once established and requires no fertilization, no pruning beyond optional shaping, and no special care of any kind. In North Florida, the plant will die back to the ground after the first hard frost and return vigorously from the roots the following spring. In South Florida, no winter dieback occurs. Cost reality. A 3-gallon Florida native firebush at a Florida garden center runs about $15 to $25. A single mature firebush will support hummingbirds, butterflies, and native bees for 15 to 20 years, attracting more wildlife to your yard than any other ornamental plant you could install. If you garden in Florida specifically to bring birds and butterflies to your kitchen window, firebush belongs in your yard. Skip the dwarf cultivars and seek out the true Florida native species, perennial salvia, specifically the heat-loving Florida-adapted varieties, Mystic Spire's Blue, Black and Blue, Wendy's Wish, and similar selections bred or selected for our specific conditions. Generic salvia from a national catalog will often fail in Florida humidity. The varieties listed above have proven themselves through multiple Florida summers. What these salvias deliver is the continuous vertical bloom presence that most other Florida perennials cannot match. Tall spikes of intense blue, purple, or red flowers rise 18 to 30 inches above the foliage from spring through frost. The plants attract hummingbirds and large native bees throughout the bloom period, providing complementary wildlife support alongside firebush and pentas. The foliage itself is aromatic when brushed, with a distinctive minty herbal scent that some Florida gardeners specifically grow these plants for. Plant heat-loving salvia in full sun in well-drained soil. The plants benefit from compost amendment in pure sand, but tolerate unamended sandy soil if irrigated during establishment. Space plants 18 to 24 inches apart. Water deeply once a week during the first growing season. After that, water only during extended dry periods. The plants benefit from a hard cutback in late winter to about 6 inches tall, which encourages vigorous spring growth and stronger upright stems. Some of the Florida-adapted varieties also respond well to a midsummer cutback by about 1/3 to encourage a stronger fall bloom flush. Cost reality. A 1-gallon Mystic Spires or black and blue salvia at a Florida garden center runs about $8 to $15. A planting of 3 to 5 salvia plants in a mixed perennial border provides vertical structure, continuous bloom for 9 to 10 months of the year, and reliable hummingbird activity throughout. Over a typical 4 to 6 year lifespan in Florida conditions, the per-bloom cost is among the lowest of any vertical accent plant available to Florida gardeners. Society garlic, Tulbagia violacea, the grass-like clumping perennial that produces tall, slender stems topped with clusters of small lavender-pink flowers, blooming almost continuously from spring through fall in Florida. Society garlic is technically not a true garlic, but is related to onions and chives, with foliage that smells distinctly of mild garlic when crushed or brushed against, a feature that makes the plant aggressively deer-resistant, rabbit-resistant, and rodent-resistant. What makes society garlic particularly valuable in Florida gardens is the combination of 3 benefits in a single plant. First, the long bloom period provides continuous color in a small architectural form perfect for the edges of beds, the front of borders, and the spaces between larger perennials. Second, the strong garlic scent of the foliage repels the major pests that destroy more delicate Florida perennials. Armadillos, raccoons, opossums, and rats all avoid society garlic plantings. Third, the foliage itself is edible and can be used in cooking exactly like garlic chives or green onions, providing a small, ongoing kitchen harvest throughout the growing season. Plant society garlic in full sun to part shade in any well-drained soil. The plants tolerate sandy Florida soil, alkaline conditions, salt spray near the coast, and drought once established. Space plants about 12 inches apart for mass plantings or 18 inches apart for accent use. Water deeply once a week during the first month after planting. After that, the plants require essentially no supplemental water except during extreme drought. Divide the clumps every 3 to 4 years if they become too dense, replanting the divisions to expand your patch or share with neighbors. Cost reality. A 4-inch society garlic plant at a Florida garden center runs about $3 to $5. A mass planting of 15 to 20 plants along a walkway or as a low border provides continuous bloom, pest deterrents for surrounding plants, and an ongoing kitchen herb harvest, all from a single inexpensive planting that requires no care for years. This is one of the highest utility perennials available to Florida gardeners and one of the most underused. Bulbine, Bulbine frutescens, the succulent perennial from South Africa that produces tall, slender stems topped with clusters of small, bright yellow or orange star-shaped flowers, blooming nearly continuously from spring through frost across most of Florida. Bulbine is one of the most underused perennials in Florida gardening, despite being one of the toughest, most drought-tolerant, and most reliable bloomers available for our conditions. What sets bulbine apart from other Florida-adapted perennials is its extreme tolerance for the worst possible growing conditions. The plant thrives in pure sand with no amendment. It survives drought that kills most other ornamentals. It blooms continuously through Florida summer heat that shuts down most other flowering plants, and it requires essentially zero maintenance once established. Bulbine is the plant that survives in the difficult spots where you have tried 3 other perennials before, and the plant that thrives in the conditions that would kill anything else. Plant bulbine in full sun in well-drained or sandy soil. Avoid heavy clay or chronically wet conditions, which cause the succulent roots to rot. Space plants about 12 to 18 inches apart for mass plantings. Water deeply once a week during the first month after planting. After that, the plants need essentially no supplemental watering at all. Bulbine planted in pure sand and ignored for years will continue to bloom and thrive. The plants spread slowly through underground rhizomes, gradually forming larger clumps that can be divided every 3 to 4 years if desired. Cost reality. A 1-gallon bulbine plant at a Florida garden center runs about $6 to $10. A mass planting of 12 to 15 bulbine plants in a difficult sunny spot creates a low ground cover with continuous yellow or orange bloom for 10 months of the year, in conditions where most other perennials would fail completely. The plant deserves much wider use in Florida landscapes than it currently receives, and the gardeners who discover it tend to plant it everywhere they can fit it. Beach sunflower, Helianthus debilis, the native Florida ground cover that produces small, cheerful yellow daisy-like flowers continuously throughout the year, with the heaviest bloom in spring and fall and continuous lighter bloom through summer and winter. Beach sunflower is one of the most genuinely useful native Florida ground covers, and one that handles the specific Florida conditions of sandy soil, salt spray, heat, and drought better than almost any other plant available. What makes beach sunflower particularly valuable is the range of difficult conditions it tolerates without complaint. The plant evolved on Florida beach dunes and coastal areas, which means it actively thrives in pure sand with high salt content, conditions that kill most ornamental plants. Beach sunflower spreads horizontally to form a dense ground-hugging mat about 6 to 12 inches tall, suppressing weeds and stabilizing soil on slopes or erosion-prone areas. The yellow flowers attract small native bees and butterflies, and the seeds provide food for goldfinches and other small birds. Plant beach sunflower in full sun in any well-drained soil, including pure sand. The plant tolerates salt spray near coastal areas and brutal summer heat in inland areas equally well. Space plants about 12 to 18 inches apart for a moderately dense ground cover, or 18 to 24 inches apart if you want the plants to spread and fill in gradually. Water deeply once a week during the first month after planting. After that, the plant requires essentially no supplemental watering except during extreme drought. Cut back hard once a year in late winter to encourage fresh spring growth. Cost reality. A 4-inch beach sunflower plant at a Florida garden center runs about $3 to $5. A planting of 12 to 15 plants establishes a substantial ground cover within one growing season that continues to spread and improve over the following years. For homeowners with difficult sunny slopes, sandy areas where lawn will not grow, or coastal properties where salt spray destroys most ornamentals, beach sunflower is one of the best dollar per square foot ground cover solutions available in Florida. Last one, coontie, Zamia integrifolia. And here is the second surprise of this video, the one I mentioned at the beginning that has been growing in Florida since long before there was a Florida, and that supports one of the rarest butterflies in North America as its only host plant in the world. Coontie is Florida's only native cycad, a primitive plant family that predates the dinosaurs, and one of the most important plants any Florida gardener can put in the ground for the natural heritage of this state. Coontie is a small palm-like plant that grows about 2 to 3 feet tall and equally wide at maturity, with stiff fern-like dark green fronds emerging from an underground caudex. The plant looks like a miniature sago palm, but is genuinely different from sago palms in critical ways. Coontie is native to Florida, where sago palm is a non-native landscape import, and coontie is the only host plant in the world for the atala butterfly, a small jewel-bright black and blue and red butterfly that was thought extinct until small populations were rediscovered in South Florida in the 1970s. Atala butterflies lay their eggs only on coontie plants. The caterpillars eat only coontie foliage. Without coontie, there are no atala butterflies anywhere on Earth. Florida coontie populations were nearly wiped out in the early 20th century when the underground caudex was harvested commercially for starch production, the source of the name coontie, from the Seminole word for the plant. By the time harvesting stopped, the plant was rare in the wild, and the atala butterfly that depended on it had crashed to near extinction. The slow recovery of both species has happened almost entirely through Florida home gardeners planting coontie in residential yards over the last 40 years, providing the host plant resources the butterfly needs to rebuild its population. Planting coontie in your Florida yard is genuinely one of the most meaningful conservation acts available to a Florida gardener. Plant coontie in part shade to full sun in well-drained soil. The plant tolerates sandy Florida soil, drought, heat, hurricane wind, and decades of complete neglect. Space plants 3 to 4 feet apart. Water deeply once a week for the first month after planting, then water only during extended dry periods. Coontie grows slowly. A plant purchased at a 1-gallon size will take 5 to 8 years to reach mature size. Once established, a coontie plant will live for 50 to 100 years or more in your yard, providing host plant habitat for atala butterflies and connecting your modern Florida home back to 1,000 years of natural Florida history. Cost reality. A 1-gallon coontie at a Florida native plant nursery runs about $20 to $35. A planting of 3 to 5 coontie plants creates a small, permanent native landscape feature plus genuine habitat for one of the rarest butterflies in North America. There is no other plant on this list that combines that kind of personal landscape value with that level of meaningful natural heritage contribution. 11 Florida perennials. One state with conditions that defeat most of the gardening advice written for the rest of America. The plants that thrive here are a specific group of survivors, some of them bred or selected for our brutal humidity and sandy soil, and some of them growing here continuously since before European settlement. All of them deliver the kind of low-labor, beautiful gardening that makes Florida yards genuinely satisfying once you commit to growing the plants that belong here, rather than fighting to grow plants that do not. Here is what I want you to take away from this video more than anything else. Florida gardening is not harder than gardening elsewhere. Florida gardening is different. The frustration most gardeners feel when they move to Florida from the north comes from trying to apply northern gardening rules to a southern subtropical reality, and from buying plants that were never meant to live here in the first place. Once you let go of the plants that do not belong and start working with the plants that do, your yard becomes one of the most rewarding gardens in the entire country. Year-round bloom, daily butterfly and hummingbird activity, plants that survive hurricanes and outlive the houses they were planted around. None of that is available to gardeners in colder climates. It is available to you, simply because you garden in Florida. Drop a comment below, telling me which of these 11 perennials you are going to plant in your Florida yard this season, because I read every comment, and your answers help me understand what matters most to Florida gardeners specifically. And subscribe to this channel for more peer-to-peer gardening content written for women who have been tending gardens for decades and deserve gardening advice calibrated to their specific climate rather than generic advice written for someone else's conditions. The Florida garden is yours. Plant the perennials that have always belonged here and let them do what they have always done.